History is often decided not by empires, but by moments, brief, brutal stretches of time when everything stands on the edge of collapse. In the summer of 1456, one such moment arrived. A single fortress, a single river crossing, and a handful of defenders would determine whether Europe would withstand the Ottoman tide or be swallowed by it. This is not merely the story of a siege. It is the story of how discipline, leadership, and resolve defied impossible odds, and why a city named Belgrade became a firewall between continents, cultures, and faiths. The summer of 1456 was unforgiving. For 19 agonizing days, the fate of Europe clung to the battered walls of one city. At Belgrade's gates stood a vast Ottoman host, an army hardened by decades of conquest, numbering as many as 100,000 by some accounts, poised to pour into Hungary and beyond. Cannons thundered, cavalry churned the earth, and Sultan Mehmed II, already infamous for devouring the Balkans, was determined to crush the final obstacle standing between him and the heart of Europe. Inside the fortress, fewer than 7,000 defenders prepared for what seemed inevitable. Hungarian troops, local militia, and armed townspeople faced an enemy that outnumbered them more than 14 to 1. By every conventional measure, Belgrade should have fallen within days. And yet, what unfolded did far more than spare a single city. It halted the Ottoman advance into Christian Europe and transformed a modest stronghold into a lasting symbol of resistance. How did a vastly outmatched garrison repel one of the most powerful armies on earth? And why did this unlikely victory shield Europe for generations to come? The answers begin just 3 years earlier. In 1453, Constantinople fell. Its ancient walls, once thought unbreakable, crumbled under Ottoman cannon fire, sending shockwaves across Europe. The fall of the Byzantine capital was more than symbolic. It erased a critical buffer overnight. With Constantinople gone, the road north and west lay open. Sultan Mehmed II wasted no time asserting his momentum. He absorbed the despotate of the Morea, conquered Trebizond, and consolidated Ottoman dominance across the eastern Mediterranean. Belgrade now stood directly in the path of expansion. Situated at the meeting point of the Danube and Sava rivers, the fortress commanded vital supply routes leading straight into Hungary and Central Europe. Control of Belgrade meant control of the rivers and the kingdoms beyond them. From a Western viewpoint, Mehmed's campaign looked like raw conquest. From the Ottoman perspective, it was the continuation of Gaza, a sacred and political mandate to expand authority and faith. This time, the Sultan was resolved to succeed where earlier attempts had failed. Preparation was meticulous. Months before the siege, Mehmed gathered men, artillery, and ships for what he believed would be a decisive blow. Some contemporary sources claimed an army approaching 100,000 strong, while modern historians estimate a more conservative 40,000 to 60,000 battle-hardened soldiers. At the core were the Janissaries, elite professionals renowned for discipline, battlefield coordination, and their early use of matchlock firearms. These were the same troops who had helped smash Constantinople's walls. Artillery was taken just as seriously. Nearly 300 cannons accompanied the campaign, including more than 20 massive bombards capable of tearing medieval fortifications apart. Mehmed even established foundries in Serbia to repair and maintain these monstrous weapons during the siege. On the rivers, an Ottoman fleet, estimates range wildly from just over 20 to nearly 200 vessels, was prepared to sever Belgrade from relief or resupply. The logic was straightforward. If Constantinople had fallen to cannon fire, why not Belgrade? Hungary, meanwhile, was in turmoil. The kingdom was politically fractured, its nobility consumed by internal rivalries. Many feared the growing influence of John Hunyadi more than the Ottoman threat itself. Pope Calixtus III grasped the stakes immediately. Constantinople's fall had shaken Christendom, and Belgrade was now the final line of defense. The Pope responded with urgency, calling for a new crusade, liquidating Vatican treasures, selling art and jewelry, cutting internal expenses and funneling every available resource toward the defense of Hungary. He even issued papal edicts urging all Catholic realms to pray for Belgrade's defenders. Yet support from secular rulers was scarce. King Ladislaus V resided safely in Vienna, and most Hungarian barons ignored the papal call. Into this vacuum stepped John Hunyadi, a seasoned commander facing an overwhelming challenge. Lacking full state backing, Hunyadi largely financed the defense himself, drawing on personal wealth, limited royal funds, and sheer improvisation. He raised a mobile force of roughly 10,000 to 12,000 veteran cavalry and mercenaries and assembled a river flotilla of around 200 boats to challenge Ottoman control of the waterways. The fortress itself was entrusted to his brother-in-law, Mihai Shalagi, who commanded roughly 7,000 professional soldiers inside Belgrade. To the south, Serbia found itself trapped between giants. Despot Durad Brankovic attempted desperate diplomacy, balancing loyalty and survival. His daughter's marriage into the Ottoman dynasty had once bought temporary peace. In early 1456, Brankovic even signed a 3-year truce with Mehmed II, surrendering territory in hopes of sparing his homeland. It was not enough. The Ottoman army marched straight through Serbian lands toward Belgrade. A Serbian force of about 9,000 men attempted to resist and was crushed on June 18, 1456, leaving devastation in its wake. Neutrality, once again, proved meaningless. Belgrade, known as Nandor Herver, was no ordinary town. Its layered defenses included strong outer walls and a towering central citadel overlooking the rivers. But these fortifications had been designed for an older age. They were never meant to endure the latest Ottoman superguns. Shalagi understood the reality. Victory would not come from annihilating the besiegers. Survival itself was the goal. They had to hold long enough for Hunyadi to arrive. The bombardment began almost immediately. Day and night, cannon fire shook the ground. Massive stone projectiles slammed into the walls, spraying dust, rubble, and terror among the defenders. Mem followed the same method that had succeeded at Constantinople: constant pressure, relentless fire, and patience. Breaches would come, and through them, the Janissaries would pour. Inside the fortress, panic flared with each impact. But preparation mattered. Breaches were patched overnight. Fires were contained. Return fire was organized where possible. Every hour bought time. Yet Mehmed understood that walls alone would not decide the siege. A fortress cannot endure if it can be fed and reinforced. Ottoman ships moved to seal the Danube and Sava, forming a blockade intended to starve Belgrade into submission. Some accounts even describe chains stretched across the river or ships locked together in tight formation. Supplies dwindled. Hope rested on the river and on Hunyadi. For the defenders, each day became a brutal calculation. Repair the walls, ration the food, steady the men, and endure, just long enough for salvation to arrive. By the second week of the siege, something unexpected began to happen. The crushing momentum that had seemed firmly in Sultan Mehmed II's favor started to slip. Two decisive developments would soon transform Belgrade from a fortress awaiting collapse into a stronghold capable of resisting one of the most powerful armies on earth. While the walls endured endless bombardment, John Hunyadi had been anything but passive. Having assembled his relief force, composed of his seasoned professional soldiers and a swelling host of crusading volunteers, he advanced toward Belgrade along the Danube. Waiting for him, however, was the Ottoman river fleet positioned to seal the city off completely. Hunyadi responded with characteristic audacity. He gathered a fleet of small, agile rivercraft, light boats and corvettes built for maneuver, not brute force, and prepared to challenge the vastly larger Ottoman vessels. Around 40 such boats took part in the operation, many crewed by local Serbs. Though their rulers hesitated to confront the Ottomans openly, ordinary people still chose resistance. It was a modest contribution on the surface, but one that would prove vital. On July 14th, Hunyadi struck without warning. For 5 intense hours, the rivers became battlegrounds of splintered wood, iron, and fire. Hunyadi's nimble ships slipped between towering Ottoman galleys, ramming where they could, boarding when opportunities arose, and unleashing disciplined volleys at close range. By dusk, the results were astonishing. 3 major Ottoman galleys lay sunk, and between 20 and 24 smaller vessels had been captured. This was no mere naval skirmish. It was a turning point. With the blockade shattered, Hunyadi rushed between 10 and 12,000 professional soldiers into Belgrade, along with desperately needed food, ammunition, and supplies. A city that had been slowly strangled suddenly found itself breathing again. Morale surged. For the first time, it was clear that Ottoman dominance, on land or river, was not absolute. Mehmed's assumption that his fleet guaranteed total control of the waterways had been decisively disproven. Yet the danger was far from over. Weeks of relentless cannon fire had achieved their purpose. The outer walls of Belgrade were breached. Entire sections lay in ruins, streets were buried in debris, and the defenders were exhausted. Sensing the moment, Mehmed ordered a full-scale assault on the night of July 21st. Elite janissaries surged through the gaps, supported by other Ottoman units, seizing large portions of the lower town beneath the citadel. For a brief moment, it appeared the fortress might finally fall. But Hunyadi had anticipated this night. Rather than meeting the attackers in chaotic street combat, he enacted a devastating countermeasure. His men ignited piles of tar-soaked wood, resin, and other combustibles, flinging them into the areas occupied by the janissaries. Fire erupted instantly, spreading with terrifying speed. The flames severed Ottoman troops from their reinforcements, filled cramped streets with smoke, and turned disciplined formations into traps. The effect was catastrophic for the attackers. Janissary discipline, normally their greatest strength, became a liability amid fire-choked alleys and collapsing structures. Many were burned alive, others cut down in close combat, and countless more thrown into confusion. By dawn, the elite core of Mehmed's army had suffered grievous losses, and its combat effectiveness was badly compromised. As the siege dragged on, it entered a strange and volatile new phase. A Franciscan friar sent by the Pope, Giovanni da Capistrano, had been preaching across the countryside, igniting religious fervor wherever he went. The result was extraordinary. Tens of thousands answered his call, somewhere between 30,000 and 60,000 men and women. Farmers, students, monks, villagers. They called themselves crusaders, cross-bearers, and though few had training, their zeal was unmatched. Most carried little more than farming tools, slings, or crude weapons. Some carried only rosaries. Yet they were willing to stand against one of the most fearsome armies of the age. Their presence was both a blessing and a danger. That danger became reality when, against explicit orders, thousands of these crusaders surged across the Sava River. Hunyadi had forbidden such action, but discipline broke. Men, women, pilgrims, and students pressed forward in a disorganized but relentless wave, harassing Ottoman positions wherever they could. Capistrano initially tried to restrain them, but when faced with nearly 2,000 determined volunteers beyond control, he made a critical decision. Instead of halting them, he stepped to the front. Raising his voice, he transformed chaos into purpose, urging them onward with cries of faith. What followed was a shock the Ottomans never anticipated. The peasant charge slammed into the rear of the Ottoman lines. The surprise was immediate and profound. Ottoman commanders, fearing a wider collapse, redeployed key units, including elite Sipahi cavalry, to contain what appeared to be a spontaneous uprising. In doing so, they unintentionally exposed the heart of the siege, Mehmed II's artillery camp. What began as an undisciplined sortie had opened a decisive gap. Hunyadi saw it instantly. Seizing the moment, he led his 10,000, 12,000 professional soldiers straight at the weakened Ottoman center. His objective was clear: the massive cannons that had pounded Belgrade for weeks. Attacked from multiple directions by Capistrano's crusaders and Hunyadi's veterans, the Ottoman defenders buckled. The artillery positions were stormed. Cannons fell into Christian hands. The very weapons meant to demolish Belgrade now crippled the Ottoman army itself. Despite frantic attempts by roughly 5,000 janissaries to retake the guns, resistance collapsed. Their commander, Hasan Aga, was killed in the fighting, leaving the elite infantry leaderless at a critical moment. For the Ottomans, the cost was devastating. For Belgrade, history had turned. Sultan Mehmed II now did what few rulers of his stature would dare. Determined to reverse the unraveling of his campaign, he entered the fighting himself. Chroniclers later described how the Sultan personally struck down a Hungarian knight in single combat, an act meant to rekindle discipline and remind his army that their ruler still commanded the field. But bravery alone could not halt the collapse, gathering momentum around him. In the dense chaos of the fighting, Mehmed was struck by an arrow in the thigh. The wound was not immediately fatal, but it was decisive. The Sultan was carried from the battlefield, unconscious. In an army built around centralized authority and personal command, his sudden removal proved catastrophic. Orders faltered. Commanders hesitated. Rumors spread faster than signals. Morale krakid would have been a powerful, coordinated force only hours earlier now slipped into fear and confusion. Units pulled back without cohesion. What might have remained a controlled withdrawal dissolved into panic. A tactical defeat turned into a full-scale rout. Under cover of night, the Ottoman army began its retreat. Around 140 wagons, drawn by horses strained to exhaustion, carried the wounded southward. But there was no time to save everything. The great cannons, symbols of Ottoman dominance, were left behind. Ammunition, provisions, and siege equipment were abandoned in the fields outside Belgrade. On July 22, 1456, the fortress was finally relieved. The siege had failed. For Mehmed II, this marked the first serious defeat of his reign since triumphing at Constantinople just 3 years earlier. An invasion that had appeared inevitable ended instead in humiliation. The outcome stunned contemporaries. Belgrade had not merely survived. It had broken the forward momentum of one of the most formidable armies of the age. This victory was remembered not for its clean lines or calculated maneuvers, but for its final day, when discipline gave way to chaos, when unplanned actions created decisive openings, and when the resolve of exhausted defenders overcame overwhelming force. In the immediate aftermath, the consequences were profound. Hungary's southern frontier stabilized. Mehmed was forced to redirect his attention toward other regions of his empire. Most importantly, the Ottomans would not attempt another major invasion of Hungary for nearly 70 years, until the disastrous clash at Mohacs in 1526. That delay mattered. It granted Central and Western Europe precious time. During this golden window, Renaissance culture deepened, economies strengthened, and political institutions matured. Had Belgrade fallen in 1456, pressure on Vienna and the German lands would have arrived decades earlier, potentially altering Europe's balance of power before it was prepared to respond. Yet the victory was not an endpoint. The Ottoman Empire remained strong, adaptive, and ambitious. Belgrade had slowed history, but it had not stopped it. Conflict between the Ottomans and European states would define centuries still to come. Almost immediately after the siege, the struggle shifted from battlefields to memory. Credit for the victory became contentious. John Hunyadi and Giovanni da Capistrano both sent letters emphasizing their own roles. Western clerical authorities leaned heavily toward Capistrano's narrative, celebrating divine favor and the fervor of the peasant crusaders. This emphasis conveniently obscured the reluctance of Europe's professional armies and political leaders to intervene decisively. From this debate emerged legend. Stories of individual heroism circulated widely. Knights were said to have sacrificed themselves dramatically atop the walls, dragging Ottoman attackers to their deaths. Figures like Titus the Govic entered folklore as symbols of national resistance. Modern historians, comparing Ottoman chronicles with contemporary correspondence, largely agree that many such tales were later embellishments, crafted to inspire, unify, and mythologize rather than record objective truth. The deeper reality is more complex and more powerful. Belgrade was saved not by a single man or moment, but by convergence. Mihai Shalagi and the garrison endured days of relentless bombardment without breaking. Hunyadi's strategic insight, especially his river victory and rapid exploitation of battlefield chaos, turned fleeting opportunities into decisive action. And Capistrano's mass of volunteers, though tactically unrefined, introduced disruption exactly when the Ottomans could least afford it. Order, chaos, and belief combined. Tragically, the men who made the victory possible did not live to see its long-term impact. John Hunyadi died of plague on August 11th, 1456, barely 3 weeks after the siege ended. Giovanni da Capistrano followed on October 23rd the same year. Their sudden deaths left Hungary politically exposed, unable to immediately capitalize on its hard-won advantage or organize further collective resistance. Hunyadi's legacy, however, did not vanish. It re-emerged through his son, Matthias Corvinus, who would later ascend the throne and continue the struggle his father had defined. Perhaps the most enduring memory of Belgrade is not found in chronicles, but in sound. Before news of victory had reached many towns, Pope Calixtus III ordered church bells to ring at noon, calling the faithful to pray for the defenders. In many places, word of success arrived first. What began as a plea became a celebration. The Pope later confirmed the practice, transforming the noon bell into permanent commemoration. Even today, across the Catholic world, those bells still ring, quiet reminders of a summer when an outnumbered city refused to fall. And so, after 19 days of endurance, risk, and resolve, Belgrade stood firm, not merely as a fortress, but as a turning point. A place where leadership met chance, where faith met strategy, and where history paused just long enough for Europe to endure.